Good evening,
Hello.
ladies.
Hi, Johnny.
Let me take a moment to call your attention to our candidates for House District 48. Mark Baker, he is the Republican incumbent, and Joe Barbuto, the Democrat challenger. Good evening to you both, gentlemen.
Good evening, gentlemen.
I like that, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us tonight. I have really been looking forward to this debate, and speaking of which, please cut me a little leeway. I try to always address all the candidates with the appropriate respect. Both of these gentlemen are very good friends of mine, so if I use your first name more than once or twice, please understand why, okay? This is being broadcast live at AM 1360 KRKK, and I'd like to take a moment to go over some of the rules of our forum for this evening. Each candidate will get a 3-minute opening statement, and we'll have questions that have already been prepared from our panelists. Each candidate then will get 90 seconds to answer. Then each candidate will have 45 seconds to respond to the other candidate's answer. We will have time, I believe, for audience questions as well, which, by the way, if you've got some questions already, feel free to raise your hand at any time, and somebody from the library will pick it up. Otherwise, we do have paper and pens in the back. Feel free to write down a question if the mood grabs you. Each candidate will then make a 3-minute closing statement. Any questions, ladies and gentlemen? Or any questions from our candidates? All right, that being the case, let's get underway. Mark Baker, our first opening statement. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Johnny. I would like to thank individuals and organizations involved for the opportunity to present the difference between my opponent and me. I would also like to thank those individuals that are participating in the crowd here and listening live on the radio. And thank the millions in our military and law enforcement that serve every day to ensure we have free speech. I'm running for re-election because I believe that principles of government must be fought for and protected. Our lifestyle and legacy are critical. I believe I share common principles with the majority of House District 48. I was raised and went to school here in Rock Springs. I graduated from Rock Springs High and continued on to WWCC, where I received 2 associate's degrees. I then continued my education in Laramie at the University of Wyoming, where I graduated with a Bachelor's of Arts. My life experience is broad. I've owned 4 small businesses, and contrary to Hillary Clinton's recent statements, businesses do create jobs. And as a legislator, I have fought for continuing an atmosphere where free market can prosper. As a business owner, I have created jobs. I am convinced the free market is the solution to many of our economic troubles. I have been a part of various organizations in our community. I've spent 3 years as a volunteer firefighter and worked as a substitute teacher. During the past decade, I have driven truck commercially, including delivering hazardous materials in the oil field. I have real-life experience with oil and gas industry, and I will continue to fight for the environment that allows our industries to flourish, despite President Obama's attempts to hamper our responsible growth. As legislators, every vote we cast counts, and it is subject to criticism. That's why I feel it is important to disclose that in 2008 and in 2012, I did not vote for President Obama. In 2016, I will not vote for Hillary Clinton. Many of the policies we will discuss tonight are linked to the failed policies of our current president. He has continued to force a top-down cookie-cutter approach. It is troubling that a federal judge or appointed administrative position tells us how to manage wolves, grizzly bears, the city boundaries of Riverton, or how to define marriage. We continue to see legislation that we have to pass to know what's in it. We need strong voices in Cheyenne that will stand for what is right in the face of political correctness. We cannot elect officials that will go along to get along. We must support individuals that will stand up on principle and will fight for what is right. There is much more to legislating than glad-handing at evening cocktail events and entertaining. Our legislators must make decisions that affect all aspects of our lives. There are fundamental differences between us here on the stage on policy, experience, morals, and approach. And as the evening progresses, I know these differences will be evident, and I am looking forward to discussing the issues and taking questions. Thank you, Johnny.
All right, thank you. That's our opening statement from Mark Baker. And now let's hear from the challenger, Joe Barbuto.
Well, thank you, Johnny. I first of all want to thank all of you for being here tonight, and those who are listening on the radio, maybe at home or at work in their car, thank you for tuning in. Thanks to the library, of course, too, for hosting this event, and to you, Johnny, for moderating, and Beth and Deb for being our panelists this evening. You know, when people ask me why I decided to run for House District 48 again in 2014, I tell them that First and foremost, I really care about this community and state, and I see serving in the legislature as a real chance to create some positive change for people. I want to raise my kids here. I want future generations to be able to live here. I don't want them just to have the good opportunities I had. I want them to have better opportunities than I had. And I think we can do some work to build a stronger foundation for education from preschool all the way on up through college or trade school, even into adult education. I want us to have good paying jobs in Wyoming from our traditional industries, but also from the other industries and kinds of businesses we ought to be attracting to our state. I think we ought to make sure that they have the same access to open lands and wild places that we have so that they can hunt, fish, or just enjoy it like all of us do. And I think that we need to do a lot of work right now to create a strong, solid economy, not just at the state level, but for the communities and counties too. They need to be given the proper resources so that they can be successful economically. When I was first elected to the legislature in 2008 and began serving in 2009, I can tell you that it was a very bipartisan group of men and women who were concerned with finding common sense solutions to real issues. Well, there's been a fundamental shift in the way our legislature in Wyoming operates. A lot of legislators, too many, now take an ideological or political approach to problems, not putting people first, and that should concern us all. People who are working in state government, who have worked with state government for years, have told me that in all the decades that they've been there, this is the most dysfunctional legislature they've ever worked with. Well, I want to go down and restore some of that Wyoming pride, some of that Sweetwater County pride that we had before. I want to do things right the way we do them in Wyoming. We've seen what that other way has done to Washington, D.C. and other states. It's created gridlock and stopped progress. Well, we can move forward again, folks. And I guess my real hope for this evening is that those of you who came here unsure of who you're voting for, or maybe even leaning towards my opponent, are going to leave saying, you know what? Joe Barbuto is the clear choice for House District 48. He has the right ideas. He's willing to listen, he's going to work hard, and he has integrity. So thank you guys for coming. I look forward to the debate.
Thank you, Joe. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you've noticed, we're already getting quite a stack of questions, and that's wonderful. That's why we're all here, is to pose our questions to these two candidates for House District 48. Once again, if some thoughts come to mind, we do have plenty of paper and pens in the back of the library, and once you've got some thoughts jotted down, feel free to raise your hand, and Lindsay or one of our fine associates from the library will pick that up for you. Well, let's get underway with our panelists' questions, and this is actually going to go first to Joe Barbuto, and let me turn the microphone over to our friend Deb Sutton.
Thanks, Johnny. It is my understanding that Wyoming is the only state in the nation that does not have a refugee resettlement program. In fall 2013, Governor Matt Mead opened the door to discussion about creating a safe haven for refugees, defined as men, women, and children fleeing war, persecution, and political upheaval. Where do you stand on the idea, and why?
Oh, well, thanks, Deb. You know, to be honest, I don't know a whole lot about the discussion. I know there's been a lot of rhetoric out there and misinformation about what's really happening, but I don't think that there's any harm in having the discussion, and, you know, I trust that Governor Mead will take the proper steps to ensure that Wyoming citizens are protected, that we're not being put in danger's way. But I don't see it as an issue that is going to have a meaningful impact on Wyoming in the next few years. But certainly it's something we can look at and discuss.
All right, thank you, Joe. And actually, let me jump in, if I may, and remind everybody that our panelists do have a little leeway this evening as far as when I asked Deb, does that satisfactorily answer your question, ma'am?
Yes.
Very good. That being the case, let's hear the answer to the same question. Mark Baker.
Thank you, Johnny. I was a part of the discussion, and I have seen the dialogue that's taken place over the last year about the issue. You're right, Wyoming is the only state that doesn't have a resettlement plan, and I think that there was some misinformation that went out about the issue. Unfortunately, I think it's something we're going to have to deal with. I do think it's going to affect the state of Wyoming. We live in a global world and we live in a global economy, and there's no doubt that individuals are moving to the United States to resettle, to flee some of those regimes in the world. And it is an issue we're going to have to face. I'm in support of creating a program that moves forward logically so that we can accept those individuals in and allow those individuals to become a part of our community. But there has to be a process. It can't be open borders. That's part of the problem with the current administration, is he hasn't controlled the borders. We're seeing people flood in and illegals flood in, and the problem is we want a process in place so that people can come to this country, achieve their dreams, go for the American dreams, and move forward in their lives. But we want a process in place. So I support us moving forward with a process so that those individuals can move here.
All right, very good. Thank you, Mark. And a rebuttal perhaps, Joe?
Well, I certainly don't disagree with anything he said, but I don't see this as being a major priority for the Wyoming legislature or Wyoming, given some of the other serious issues we're facing in this state.
All right, thank you, Joe. Anything in closing on that topic, Mark?
Yeah, I guess I would have to disagree that we're paid to deal with these issues. We go down there, and these issues are going to come our way whether we're ready for them or not. That's part of the environment that we're in, is we're forced to make choices that we don't feel comfortable with. So I think moving forward, it is something that's going to affect us. We live in a global economy. So for me, it is something that's a priority. All these issues are priority. So I speak with constituents all throughout the dialogue and the door-to-door, and they tell me their issues. I don't blow them off and say, well, that's just not a priority, it's no big deal. I have dialogue with them, and I explain my position on the facts, and I explain my position moving forward, and then from there, I explain how they can move forward with their issues. So I just disagree. It is an issue. We have to deal with this. It's moving our way, and Wyoming is behind.
All right, very good. Thank you, Mark. Let's move right along to our next series of questions. We'll turn the microphone over to Beth Whitman. And Mark Baker, this will be directed at you first, sir.
What services do you feel that Wyoming could do a better job providing?
I think Wyoming could do a better job in a number of different things. One is education. You know, it is right that Wyoming has a legislature now that is kind of dysfunctional. And part of that has to do with the Senate File 104. I was there when that happened. That created some discourse in the legislature. It created a split, and it allowed individuals to really be polarized from the beginning of the legislature. That bill was pushed through, and it was pushed through unprecedented in a manner that the bill was pushed from the Senate over to the House prior to crossover. That created a lot of contention in the House, because generally bills follow a process. So I think in education, and there is a lot of dysfunction in education, we can provide services. I think we really have to look at how we're providing education moving forward. We're going to face some tough issues with the COLES bonuses. That provides 20% of the education fund. So education is one issue. I think moving forward, we also need to look at how we're going to prioritize spending and the services that we provide with those. As a state, it's important that we ensure that our children have a future and that we're saving for the future. So those services have to be weighed on an individual basis.
All right, very good. And the same question, we'll go to Joe Barbuto. Once again, what services do you feel that Wyoming could do a better job of providing?
Well, I think certainly education is something we can talk about, and I'm sure you have more questions about that. I think the real dysfunction in education is that we have a legislature that has gone from oversight to micromanagement of education in this state. So we're not really letting educators do their job. We're telling them how to do their job from China, and that's wrong. With regards to other services, I think something that's kind of been a trend in this last legislature, and I'll give you an example, with our developmental disability waivers. That's a service that's provided by the state. Well, to add more people, they cut the number of services that they offer. So now we don't offer prime services. We don't offer as good of service as we used to. We have more people, but they're getting a lower standard, and I don't think that makes much sense, especially when we have almost $2 billion sitting in a rainy day fund.
All right, very good. Thank you, Joe. And a rebuttal perhaps, Mark?
No, I think, like I said, every service has to be looked at individually, and that's the decisions that we face in the legislature. I think it's important that moving forward, we prioritize what we're going to do. The Medicaid waiver program was an issue, and then we came back and we tried to address that issue. I think it's important moving forward, though, that we understand our priorities, and our priorities lie with our kids and our future.
All right, very good. And closing thoughts, perhaps, Joe?
No, not right now.
All right, very good. The next series of questions, Joe Barbuto, it's actually coming back to you. And posing the next series of questions, once again, Deb Sutton.
Thanks, Johnny. BLM adopted a Wyoming-crafted plan to conserve sage-grouse habitat in a state-federal deal to protect millions of acres of land from development in hopes of keeping the greater sage-grouse off the endangered species list. Does the deal go too far or not far enough?
Well, I don't know if the deal goes too far. I think that it ignores some other facts that are present in the situation, that we also have a problem with crows and ravens in the area, and that's decimated the population of sage-grouse also. So I don't know if the plan's gone too far, but it certainly hasn't taken a multi-perspective look at the issue.
And does that satisfactorily answer your question, Deb?
Yes, I guess it does. I was actually looking too, and this is my fault for not asking more about the land use issues also associated with that deal.
Oh, all right. Well, certainly it does impact our, particularly our energy industry and our mineral extraction industry. And I think that we have to just take a responsible look at what the situation really is. I'm not as familiar with the whole plan, but we do have to have multiple perspectives on the issue.
All right, very good. Thank you, Joe Barbuto. Let's get back to Mark Baker. Again, the questions surrounding sage-grouse habitat, the greater sage-grouse, and keeping it off the endangered species list in a state and federal deal regarding land. Mark Baker, your thoughts?
Thank you, Johnny. I have been a part of this conversation as well. It's just one more illustration of how the federal government and their oversight is overreaching and how it affects us here in the state of Wyoming. This administration has gone very, very far in trying to overreach the boundaries and overregulate our industry. Now, there's discussion about what's really causing the sage-grouse and their extinction. Part of the problem, I think, is the fact that we have wolves that have been illegally reintroduced. And what that's done is that's pushed the coyotes further south or further into lower elevations. From there, the coyotes are preying on the sage-grouse. So the issue, again, is tied back to the federal government. Do I think it's overreaching? Absolutely. I think that the plan is overreaching. I think it's important that we protect the sage-grouse, but there are other areas in the country that have a very, very healthy population of sage-grouse. So I guess it's a matter of priorities. Are we going to allow the federal government to come in and overreach and overstep their bounds once again in our state, or are we going to fight back and are we going to allow the state to control those species? So for me, I think it is overreaching.
All right, very good. And rebuttal, perhaps, Joe?
Well, only to say that it's easy to talk about federal overregulation, overreaching, those are great buzzwords, but the fact is, had it not been for the preventative measures taken by the legislature and Governor Friedenthal in the last half of his term, that sage-grouse probably would be on the endangered list right now, and that was through federal and state cooperation that we accomplished that.
All right, very good. Mark, anything in closing on that topic?
Absolutely. I think it is very easy to talk, and I think talk is cheap, and that's why we need to elect legislators that are willing to go down and fight the battle for us.
All right, very good, sir. Let's move right along, and we'll turn the next series of questions actually back to Mark Baker. And Beth Whitman, go for it.
Thank you.
Reconsider which aspect?
Common Core.
Well, I think, it's a theme, but it really is. It's a top-down approach from the federal government. And the issue with Common Core is that there wasn't that availability and that approach to allow parents and teachers to have input into the programs. I think everybody wants to have some type of standard in education. We all agree we want our kids to have barometers, and we want them to reach for those barometers and to move forward. It's unfortunate that we're pushing kids through to the 7th grade that can't read. But for me, I think those issues need to be handled locally. And it's not just a matter of talking about it, it's a matter of doing it. So reanalyzing the Common Core, absolutely. I think it's important that Wyoming has standards that are appropriate for Wyoming students.
And does that satisfactorily answer your question, ma'am?
Well, I believe so.
All right, very good. Now I want to hear from Joe Barbuto, your thoughts regarding Common Core and where should Wyoming be?
Thank you, John. Thank you, Beth, for the question. First of all, Common Core is not a federal program. Common Core is a collaboration between states to develop a set of common standards so that when we are comparing testing scores, when we're testing reading and math, that we have apples to compare to apples. There was a period for parents and for teachers and for everybody else to examine those standards. You can go look at them right now. If you go to the Wyoming Department of Education website, there's a whole page dedicated to Common Core standards. And you can go and look at it and see what those are. If we feel like we need to revisit those, we can do that through legislative action, of course, but they are scheduled to be reconsidered in 2017. I don't think it's a bad idea to have high standards for our students, but it is imperative that parents are involved in that process and teachers and all stakeholders in the community from the very beginning.
All right, thank you, Joe. Rebuttal, perhaps, Mark?
Just a brief one. There are members here in the audience that are experts on this, and I think there's information out there that's available for people that shows that this was a federal top-down approach to education. It wasn't something that was allowed. States didn't really have input in the process. So, I mean, we can agree to disagree on the process, but I guess I would encourage individuals to do their own research.
All right, very good. Joe, closing thoughts on that topic?
That's just not true. I'm sorry to say that, and I hope by the experts in the audience you're talking about the teachers I see out there, because they're the ones who are giving me this information, and the parents who have been involved in the process. So thanks for the question.
All right, very good. And Joe Barbuto, this question will come to you first, and with that series of questions, Deb Sutton.
Thanks, Johnny. Should the state kick in more money for rural airline subsidies to help retain air service in Sweetwater County?
That's a good question. Well, I think the issue we're facing now, I attended a county commission meeting not too long ago, and I see some commissioners in the audience, of course. I hope you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like we are moving to some more expensive options, one way or the other. We can do it now, we can do it later. I don't think that communities should be left to handle that expense on their own. And this is not just for subsidies for airline service. I think that we should be investing more into our communities in general, from the legislative stabilization reserve account or the rainy day fund. There's almost $2 billion in there, and there's a lot of things we can do with that, with regards to investing back into our community. I'm sure that that's one of them. I know that a lot of people rely on that service. The numbers aren't probably what they need to be to make it a self-sufficient service, and perhaps we can have it. There's an airline and aerospace committee in the legislature, and maybe they can spend some more time looking at that issue, and they probably are. But certainly, there is some wisdom to investing more in communities, and that would be where some of that money would go, I think.
All right, very good. And once again, a reply from Mark Baker, the question surrounding state kicking in more for rural airline subsidies to retain air services here in Sweetwater County. Mark Baker, your thoughts?
Thank you, Johnny. I definitely think that it's appropriate for the state to continue to fund the airline services. I think it's imperative to our growth. When we're trying to attract these businesses into Sweetwater County, they want to be able to fly their CEOs in and out of here. They don't want them to have to fly into Salt Lake and weather the Three Sisters in the middle of the winter. It's important as we continue to move forward with a vision that we do supplement these industries until they are viable on their own. So I think moving forward, we need to go and fight and ensure that this isn't something that gets cut out of the budget. Absolutely.
All right, very good. And Joe Barbuto, perhaps a rebuttal?
Only to say that just investing in that one service isn't going to make it viable. If we want to make it viable, then we need to invest in our community so that they can attract those businesses, so they can attract those new industries here, so that we have people to fly in and out besides those of us who are taking trips and vacations.
Very good. Closing thoughts on that topic, Mark Baker?
No, thank you.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen of the audience, if I can encourage you to withhold your personal feelings, whether it be applause or jeers, until after the end of this debate, I'd be much obliged. And for the next series of questions, this will be directed first at Mark Baker and Beth Whitman.
All right, I would like to know, where do you stand on Second Amendment rights, including guns in schools? And how would you manage this if that's something you are for?
Well, Beth, this is a great topic, I think, that illustrates a large difference between the two of us. I am endorsed by the NRA. I think they did that for a reason. I've been a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. I think that the Second Amendment shall not be infringed. I sponsored bills and I moved forward with those bills. I think it's imperative that we're allowed to defend ourselves. We live in a dangerous world, and it's important that we have that right to protect ourselves. Moving forward, I think that guns in schools, I think that we can absolutely look at the state of Utah. That's what I would like to see. The state of Utah, you get a concealed weapon permit, you're allowed to carry in the school. They say, okay, well, what about the teacher that shot herself in the foot? Well, what about the law enforcement officer that shot himself in the foot? Are we going to disarm law enforcement officers? There's a large process and fingerprinting that goes along with getting a concealed weapon permit. Once you get that permit, I think you should be able to carry in schools. Absolutely.
All right, very good. Thank you, Mark Baker. And the same question regarding Second Amendment rights, including guns in school. Joe Barbuto.
Well, there has been a lot of misinformation and rhetoric out there on this subject and where I really stand on these issues. I can let you know that I own guns for hunting, recreation, self-defense, heaven forbid, so it's important to me to defend Second Amendment rights, and I have in the past. I do have a record, regardless of what you might have heard, that supports Second Amendment rights. As far as the issue of guns in schools, though, I think the only people, this is not just my opinion, by the way. I don't just wake up and think this is how it is. I talk to people and learn what they think, and in this case, I've talked to a lot of people in education, school teachers, school administrators, school staff. They don't want guns in the classroom. They feel like it'll detract away from the main purpose of what we have education for, to educate children. But I would support the recommendations that came from the School Security Commission to fund more resource officers in the schools. And I think that in Wyoming, we've done something, I don't know how it's done in other states, but we've made a really good effort of providing education and training to people so that the gun culture is completely different here than it might be even in a state like Utah or somewhere back east.
All right, thank you, Joe Barbuto. Rebuttal, perhaps, Mark Baker?
Yeah, I guess there is a lot of misinformation. My opponent has a voting record. He spent 4 years in office. The NRA has looked at that. Other organizations have looked at that. I think it's pretty apparent where he stands on the issue. Owning guns and fighting for guns, I think, are two separate issues. I also believe that, you know, we look around and we see these school shootings, and the number one factor on how many people die is how quickly the second gun gets on site. We see school shootings that happen all the time, and the reason they happen is because it's a gun-free zone. They're open game for predators, and I think it's an important issue, and I think it's important that if we can move forward with something that allows our teachers to be armed, I support that.
Very good. And closing thought, perhaps, Joe?
Only to say that there is misinformation out there, and it's out there because of my opponent and the special interest groups who are afraid of losing his seat. You can't look at guns as a black and white issue. There's always going to be nuances that you have to consider when voting on any piece of a legislation, and that includes guns.
All right, very good. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, we are at the point of the evening where we're ready to take your questions. If you have additional questions, please feel free to write them down and send them to a member of the library. What I'm going to do, and by the way, just so we're clear, you do not need to put your name on the question. If it's a valid question, I'd be happy to read it for you. Otherwise, the questions that we do have, I will give you the opportunity to read it yourself or read it for you. Where's Brad Russell at? Brad? Sir, would you care to read this, or would you like me to?
Go ahead.
All right, sir. And Deb, keep me straight. Who does this go to first? Thank you. It'll go to Joe Barbuto from our friend Brad Russell. He asks, now that gay marriage is legal in the state, how do you intend to the rest of the entrenched discriminatory policies such as hiring, firing, and housing? Hold off on a second. Now, Brad, are you concerned with something perhaps like extending equal right? Okay, I just want to make sure we understand you.
You can go ahead and get married, but you're still discriminated. You can still be discriminated against in other ways.
So let's talk about, and again, this is going to go to Joe first, your thoughts now that gay marriage is passed, and it's fair to say leveling the playing field for everybody. Joe, your thoughts?
Oh, well, I think the next step, and I think what maybe Mr. Russell is referring to, is that sexual orientation is not protected against discrimination under our Wyoming statutes. Religion, race, ethnicity, color, all of those things are, but not sexual orientation. So I'm supportive of adding that to the discrimination laws, adding that category.
All right, very good. Sir, does that satisfactorily answer your question?
Sure, I'd like to hear from
Oh, we will. I just want, before we moved on, and at this time, let's go on to Mark Baker again, leveling the playing field and prohibiting discrimination for gays, lesbians, homosexuals. Your thoughts?
Well, thank you, Johnny. This is an important issue. It's been in the press recently. I'm disappointed, actually, in our Supreme Court for not addressing the issue. I think it's a states' rights issue, and what they've done is they've allowed one judge to make a decision, and he's legislating from the bench. Now, this comes from, again, an administration at the national level that has come with a top-down approach. So for me, I think it's important that we continue to fight for states' rights. Also, for me, I think it's important that we, as now that they've legalized same-sex marriage, I think it's important that we protect business owners and clergy. They have the same freedoms. I think if they want to refuse service to individuals, it's their right to refuse service to individuals. So for me, a protected class, creating another protected class, I don't know that I support that.
All right, thank you. And a rebuttal, perhaps, Joe Barbuto.
You can be upset as you want at the Supreme Court and their actions. You might as well go pound sand, though it's the law of the land now. And I think that we need to turn our attentions elsewhere, and I think that a great place to turn it is towards ending discrimination in Wyoming. And a big part of that will be adding sexual orientation to our anti-discrimination law categories.
All right, thank you, Joe Barbuto. And a final thought, Mark Baker, on that.
I guess this is one more issue that illustrates the differences between the two of us. Pounding sand, I don't know if that's appropriate. For me, I disagree with abortion. Roe versus Wade was passed a long time ago. So for me, is it now that, and the Supreme Court ruling was you know, the Supreme Court is split on issues all the time. But anyway, going back to Roe versus Wade, I disagree with abortion. Roe versus Wade was passed a long time ago. So because it's the law of the land, does that mean that we have to just give up our morals and our values and stop fighting? No, I'm going to continue to fight for what I believe is right, whether it's life or the sanctity of marriage.
All right, thank you, Mark Baker, and let's move right along for another series of questions. This is actually going to be coming to you first. And Christy Hooley, ma'am, would you care to read this?
Sure.
Okay. Always give you the option, okay?
Sure, thank you.
And this is going to go first to Mark Baker.
Okay.
Here you are.
Okay, first of all, I want to thank both of you for putting yourselves out there, because I know it's a big deal. What is your opinion concerning parental rights and the recent Attorney General's statement concerning opting out of standardized testing?
Thank you, ma'am. And Mark Baker, this is to you first, I believe.
Thank you, Christy. I think this is an important issue. I think it is a parental rights issue. I think what we need to do is we need to allow parents to have control over their kids' education. Simple.
Ma'am, does that answer satisfactorily answer the question for you?
Do you agree or disagree with the AG's opinion?
Mark, so the follow-on, so everyone understands, do you agree or disagree with the AG's opinion?
The AG's opinion, and correct me if I'm wrong, says that they don't have the option to opt out, correct?
That's right.
Yeah, I disagree.
Thank you.
Very good. Same question, Joe Barbuto.
Well, of course, I think that parents have rights and that their right should be considered first, so long as they're not bringing harm to the child. As far as the opinion goes, I haven't read that and I'm not familiar with it. As standardized testing goes, I think there's too much of it, so maybe rather than having kids opt out, we should just lessen the amount of standardized tests we have and give teachers some time to teach.
All right, thank you, Joe. Mark, anything in rebuttal on that?
No, thank you, sir.
All right, Joe, anything in closing?
No, thank you.
Ma'am, thank you. Good question. Let's move right along, and Teresa Richards. Pardon me? I'd be happy to, ma'am. All right, so this will go first to Joe Barbuto from Teresa Richards. Joe, what is your stance on energy, and what policies are you going to promote to benefit Sweetwater County's economy? So, your thoughts on energy, Joe?
Yeah, well, thank you for the question, Teresa. I'm supportive of our energy industry and our mineral extraction industry. I think that we need to find balance between that and our conservation needs, because we have other natural resources like those wide open spaces and the wildlife that we need to be able to enjoy also. There is a lot of regulation right now, and there's lots of threats coming from the federal government when it comes to things like coal and even natural gas, and I think Trona will be on that list sometime too. What I think we can do to be proactive is work with our university. We're working right now to make it a top-tier engineering school, invest in them, partner with some industry folks who I know are willing, and find out ways we can improve our mineral extraction industry, make it more efficient, put less of a footprint on the land when they're conducting their business. The opportunities are out there right now. People are willing to invest the time if Wyoming's willing to invest some of that money and use the university as a resource.
All right, very good. Before we continue, Teresa, does that satisfactorily answer that question? Very good, thank you. Let me pose the same question now to Mark Baker. Your thoughts and your stance on energy and what policies that you are going to promote specifically to benefit Sweetwater County's economy, Mark?
Thank you, Johnny. I think this is an important issue. I have been involved with this issue over the last 2 years. I think that if you support our administration at the national level, if you support President Obama, then you're not supporting industry. There's a war on coal. And I think we have to fight back against the federal government. It's just one more issue. So for me, I've been involved in a number of different things. One, the industrial heartland. I don't know if any of you read about it, but there's been some news releases about it. Representative Freeman went over to China. We've had a delegation that's traveled to Canada. It's a great opportunity for Sweetwater County. It could be located here in Sweetwater County, and it could bring billions of dollars of revenue to our state. It could bring thousands of jobs. I think it's key. I see our commissioners here. They've talked to the governor about it. Moving forward, I think we need to fight the federal government as much as we can. We have to fight the regulations. We have to create an environment that allows industry to move here that's friendly for them. I think we need to continue to reduce and keep our tax burden low. There is no corporate income tax. I think that's great because those entities come here and they love doing business here. Wyoming is a great place to live, it's a great place to do business, and I think we need to keep it that way.
All right, very good. A rebuttal, Joe Barbuto?
We can continue to fight the federal government on all of these issues, and I'm sure we will, but none of these are issues that we're going to be able to litigate our way out of, and we do need to start thinking about investing in technology and innovations that's going to improve the process of mineral extraction and energy production. I don't think that'll ever be to the satisfaction of the federal government, but it's something that we need to pursue. It's just a responsible thing to do.
Very good, thank you. And a closing thought, Mark Baker.
Just briefly, I think it is important. That's why I voted for the bill that allowed the university to move forward with that research into clean coal technology.
All right, very good. And moving right along with questions from the audience. Christy Hooley. Got a couple good questions this evening. And I believe this goes first to Joe Barbuto. Deb, is that correct?
Yes.
All right.
No, this one goes to Mark Baker.
So first to Mark Baker. And here you go.
Okay, having both of you spent time in the legislature, could you give a specific thing that you did to benefit your constituents during your time in office?
All right, thank you, Christy. That's to you, Mark Baker.
Absolutely. Thank you, Christy, and thanks for the question again. I've fought for a number of different bills, whether it's the adjunct professor bill at the schools, whether it's fighting for consensus grant money coming back our way, whether it's a bill for artificial light that allows fishers to use artificial light. I've fought for electronic citations. That bill, I was very, very positive moving forward. And it fell short in the Senate, but it was put on an interim topic study. And I have a good feeling that bill that I started out this last session with is going to move forward. That's going to be huge. That's going to save our cities, Rock Springs, Anchoring River, a lot of money and time moving forward. I've fought for a number of different bills, and I think it's important that we continue to fight at the local level.
All right, very good. And ma'am, does that adequately answer your question?
Yes, thank
All
you.
right, very good. Let's direct that same question to Joe Barbuto. And again, the question, having both spent time in the legislature, give a specific thing, and I would say perhaps a multitude of things, or a number of them anyway, that you feel you did specifically to benefit your district, Joe.
Well, certainly, and thank you for the question, Christy. There's a number of things I was passionate about then that I'm passionate about now. One was improving our archaic laws regarding family and domestic violence. We weren't taking that issue, at least in our statutes, as serious as we ought to. And so I sponsored and helped pass a number of pieces of legislation that did improve those laws. Something I'm particularly proud of is a bill that I co-sponsored with Senator Cale Case, a Republican from Lander. And this was called the Seclusion and Restraint Bill. And this bill affects all students and all teachers and all districts in the state, but it particularly was directed towards those students and those teachers who work with students that are living with developmental disabilities. And it created a process to create standards for dealing with those folks. Like I said, any student, but particularly developmental disabilities students, to deal with them when they acted out or when they had issues, so that they were dealt with appropriately. It kept the teachers from being liable for harm so long as they followed those procedures, and it kept those students safe, which I think is very important and I think has made a difference here in Sweetwater County.
All right, thank you, Joe. Let me go back to Mark and a rebuttal, perhaps.
Yeah, just thinking back, you cast 1,200 votes in about 2 years. So those 1,200 votes have to align up with your constituents and with the things that you believe in. So I'd be happy to go back and discuss these things. I've put a lot of this information on Facebook. I was involved in co-sponsoring in 2013 10 House bills. I was involved with 2 Senate files. One of them was the silencer bill. In 2014, I was involved with 4 House bills myself sponsoring, and co-sponsored 6 House bills and 1 Senate file. So there's a whole number of issues that all involve, and for me, every vote that we cast is relevant and affects our constituents. And I love to have that communication and dialogue with individuals on a regular basis.
All right, thank you, Mark. And closing thoughts, Joe?
No, that's true. You do cast a lot of votes, and before you do so, you better be informed. And the test I go through is that I think about when I'm casting any votes is first, how's it going to affect people in House District 48? Next, how will it affect people in the community and the county? And finally, how will it impact people in the state? And I think the best question sometimes you can ask is what happens, and this, by the way, comes from a Republican president. I heard this from George H.W. Bush. What happens if you do nothing? So certainly there are a lot of issues I've dealt with. I've cast a lot of votes, and I'm proud of my record.
All right, very good. Ladies and gentlemen, I've got a question here. I would like to direct it first to Joe Barbuto. Joe, what have you done or will you do to bring jobs to Sweetwater County outside of the natural resource industry, like Cheyenne, McMurray, Industrial Park, supercomputer, things like that?
Well, I think, thanks for the question. I don't know who asked that. I didn't hear that. But
Neither do I, and I apologize.
Okay. Well, thanks whoever you are out there. And I think one of the most important things we can do is start investing in ourselves. We hear all the time that companies, industries, organizations, they want to come to Wyoming because they say, in fact, a report just came out, you have some of the best tax structure in the country. You have business-friendly laws. But what you don't do is invest in yourself, so we're not going to invest in you. Sitting in that rainy day fund, that LSRA, is close to $2 billion. And I think saving is a good policy, don't get me wrong. I think we continue to save, but we need to take a portion of that and invest it back into local governments, into county government, into municipal government, and let them work on economic development and addressing infrastructure needs that are impacting health and human safety. It's really about building a strong foundation first, and then those folks, I think, will be willing to invest in Wyoming because the other pieces are in place.
All right, thanks, Joe. Let's get back to Mark Baker. And Mark, what have you done or what will you do to bring outside jobs to our county that are outside the natural resource industry?
Well, one thing that I've done is I'm a small business owner. That in and of itself creates jobs. I've employed people. I help spur the economy. But I think the number one thing that we can do is continue to keep our tax burden low. Create an atmosphere that companies know that they're going to be protected. As a state, we have to show that we're going to stand up for those industries when they come under attack from the federal government or any other agency. So I think the biggest thing that we can do is keep an environment that businesses think is business friendly and feel is business friendly, and that in and of itself will attract jobs.
All right, thank you, Mark. Rebuttal, perhaps, Joe?
Not really a rebuttal, just to say that we do have, relative to other states, we do have a fairly friendly business environment. In fact, if you read the newspaper in the last couple of years, some people have said we're a little too business friendly. We've been a tax shelter for some large companies. But the fact of the matter is that nothing is going to happen until we start investing in today. We can save for tomorrow, but we need to invest in today also.
All right, very good. Closing thoughts on that topic, Mark?
No, thank you.
All right, Very good then. And Deb, where should we go next as far as our audience questions? This one? Okay. I have my buddy Deb Sutton keep me straight here.
It's
And
not easy.
It's not. Is it Tom Gagnon?
Yes.
Sir, would you care to read this, or would you like me to?
I'll go ahead and.
Let me come your way, sir, so everyone can hear your bright, cheery voice over the radio, and I'll bring your question to you as well. There you go, sir.
Mark Baker, if you were in charge of the war on drugs, what would you do?
Pretty straightforward, Mark.
Great question. If I was in charge of the war on drugs, I think the biggest thing with the war on drugs is that we have to create an environment where kids and people feel like there's something to live for. We have to offer them something and hope for a future that will allow them to look past their current needs or their current problems. So for me, the biggest thing is creating an atmosphere of hope and creating jobs and creating an atmosphere where people feel like they're going to be accepted. The war on drugs also, I think, is somewhat a failure, but I don't know that legalization is the answer. I don't think that it is, because I think that it's going down the wrong trail. I think legalization of marijuana is a bad idea. I think that what we need to do is we have to find some way of giving people hope and moving forward so that they don't feel that they have to put themselves in an atmosphere outside of themselves by using some illegal substance or some substance that alters their mindset.
All right, very good. Sir, does that satisfactorily answer the question for you?
No, it does not.
One moment, gentlemen. Let me get back to my friend Tom here. Your thoughts, sir?
The legalization of marijuana has proven to be a good thing. It helps to ameliorate the war in Mexico, and it's made a lot of money for Colorado, and it helps keep a lot of people out of prison, usually minorities and so forth. And I think that the war on drugs is a manifest failure. We've got to move beyond it. Richard Nixon started it with the DEA a long time ago to divert attention from the Vietnam War and so forth. So, no, Mr. Baker, I don't think that you know what you're talking about on this one.
All right. Mr. Baker, let me get you an opportunity to reply to that, and we'll get Joe Barbuto's thoughts. Thank you, Tom.
Well, sir, I guess that's what's great about our country, is we have the opportunity to disagree with one another, and I would absolutely disagree with you. I've attended a number of conferences. There are a number of issues that have gone on along with Colorado legalizing marijuana. They've flowed into our state. It's created a number of issues. It's created an atmosphere of homelessness. It's created an atmosphere of abuse. It's created an atmosphere of overburdensome, financial problems in not only hospitals, but in city government and law enforcement. So I guess the information you receive is different than what I receive.
Thank you, Mark. And Joe Barbuto, let me set this up once again. The initial question was, if you had your way with running the war on drugs, what would happen? I want you to take that initial question, if you would please, along with the other things that have been discussed in the last couple minutes. Your thoughts?
Oh, thank you, John, and thank you, Tom, for the question. I guess, first of all, I wouldn't look at it as being a war, necessarily. There's a lot of people in prison right now who aren't attached to violent crime or anything else, but are just in there because they had in their possession an illegal substance or were intending to sell a illegal substance or something like that. So I think it's important, first of all, that we make sure that there are plenty of treatment opportunities, that the resources are available for people to get the treatment. There's a lot of stigma around that, of course, and we need to work on fixing that also. But it's important that treatment opportunities are available and that we look at those situations from that perspective, not just through a penal system. And second, and this is, I guess I work in this area, so I can talk about it a little bit intelligently. We need to make sure that we're working to prevent these issues in the first place from before they ever happen, because we know that for every dollar we spend in prevention, you're saving $7 in intervention later on.
All right, thank you, Joe Barbuto. A rebuttal, perhaps, Mark Baker?
Just a continuation on the discussion. The state is currently going through a process to study why our incarceration rates are what they are. I think that there's going to be some good information. It's the Pew study. They're coming out with some good information and some suggestions, whether it's through sentencing, whether it's through diversion. We heard some discussion on that previously, whether it's through programs like the 24/7 sobriety program, which I was a part of recently. Those programs I do think do make a difference. But I think ultimately you have to give people some type of hope, some type of will to move forward in their life without wanting to alter their intellect.
All right, very good, Mark. And closing thoughts on the big topic of the war on drugs, Joe.
Yeah, you do have to give people hope. I think that's important, but they have to have a place to go. And so long as they're not involved in violent crime or things to harm others, I think that the focus does need to be on treatment and prevention. The only other thing I want to mention that I think maybe Tom was getting at is that we do have 2 states now in this country that have legalized marijuana. They've done that very recently, so there's no solid statistics. We don't really know a whole lot yet, at least not responsibly. We don't know what the impact is going to be, but that's something that not just Wyoming, but every state can use when they look forward to whether or not they want to take similar measures. I'm not in support, I'm not against, but I think that we at least have the examples from our neighbors to the south and in the northwest corner of our country.
All right, very good. And Joe, this question would actually be directed to you first. It's an anonymous question, but I think a pretty good one. So whoever submitted this, thank you. Joe, again, this is to you. What 2 books have you read that most greatly influenced your life?
Well, that's a tough question. I don't know who has time for reading anymore. Well, I'll tell you, my wife and I, we engage in scripture study, and certainly that has an impact on my life and keeps me on the straight and narrow. As far as a second book goes, that's a good question. I spend a lot of time reading biographies and nonfiction are my favorite. I particularly like to read about people who've been successful in business, people who've been successful in politics or religion or anything else, to find out what traits they possessed or what actions they took to get where they were. So I don't know that I can think of one particular book right now that stands out among the rest, but after Tuesday I look forward to having a lot more time to read.
All right, very good. And again, the question to Mark Baker, what 2 books have you read that have most greatly influenced your life?
Well, I think number 1 is probably the Bible. I think there's a lot of history in there. But putting 2 more in there. One is probably The Assignment by Mike Murdoch. That's a great book. I think it allowed me to see things a little bit differently. It talked about looking at yourself and analyzing yourself and seeing where your place is in this world and the things that you're supposed to do and the problems you're supposed to solve and how you're supposed to approach going about doing that. Secondly, I think something that really changed my life dramatically was Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. It's a book about business. He talks about, and the subtitle of the book is What the Rich Teach Their Kids That the Poor and the Middle Class Do Not. The first time I read that book was the first time I went out and decided I was going to start a business. I went out to A&Z Pawn Shop and I bought myself a mower and a trimmer and a leaf blower, and I said, okay, my uncle doesn't have to be rich, my parents don't have to be business owners, I don't have to win the lottery, I don't have to get some inheritance to start a business, and it opened up my mind to what the rich think about, and they teach their kids that the poor and the middle class do not. And one is that your secular education has nothing to do with your finances, and the second one is that the rich don't work for their money, they make their money work for them.
Very good. Any follow-on thoughts, Joe Barbuto?
I did think of a book that I really liked and was pretty impactful on me. It was one called Neither Wolf Nor Dog, and it really showed me that there are multiple perspectives in this world, and that the way I see the world maybe isn't always accurate, that there's other folks that see the world differently, and it's important that we consider that perspective also when making decisions and when we're doing things that impact their lives.
All right, thank you, Joe. Mark, any closing thoughts on that topic?
No, I love to read. It's something that I've really enjoyed doing. It's amazing how when you get into a book and you start reading, how time just seems to disappear. 6 or 8 hours can just be gone like that. One more book that I just want to plug, it's called Look Again. It's a really neat book that talks about when you don't get what you want and you're not receiving or seeing the results that you want, what you need to do is keep trying and look again and look again. So I love reading. It's changed my life.
All right, thank you both. Thank you for that question as well. And aside from Scripture, You gentlemen mentioned no books that I would have picked as either of your favorites. So thank you once again. Deb, what do you say we visit with Steve O'Brien?
Sounds good.
Steve, would you like to read this? Would you like
Go ahead, Judge.
All right. Well, this is from our friend Steve O'Brien, and this is going first to Mark Baker. Thank you, ma'am. What does Wyoming and North Dakota? Okay, so entities, we've got people, companies working in North Dakota. What do we do about that?
Tens of thousands of Wyoming aides are working in North Dakota right now and transferring back and forth. And it's a lot of taxes that could be coming to Wyoming.
Something we've seen not only across the nation, but across the world, sometimes called the flight of earls. So, Mark, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, thank you for that question. I think the biggest thing we need to do is fight back against those agencies that are trying to overregulate us. The reason why North Dakota is doing so well is because their industries are being, and their minerals are being extracted from private land. And I think that's important. It's a key. We have the minerals and those hardcore materials here. I think it's important that what we do, again, is fight back against overregulation, and that we ensure that we create an environment, once again, that has a low tax burden. That's key.
All right, thank you. And, sir, does that satisfactorily answer your question?
Well, except for I'm one of those guys that work in North Dakota, and I've worked down here for many, many years in the same industry, and they are far more regulated than we are.
Okay, so any follow-on thoughts?
Well, the difference is on the land. It's where the land that they're developing. The land is private land. So the regulations are different on private land than they are on federal land and state land. The permitting process is completely different. They may have more regulations for federal and state land, but the private land is really where the development is occurring, and that's what's creating the jobs. So I guess I just have to disagree with you.
All right, thank you, Mark Baker. And again, taking the initial question, Joe Barbuto, about what we as Wyomingites do about the large tax base that is working in North Dakota, along with the follow-on thoughts. What are your thoughts, Joe?
Thank you, Steve, for the question. You know, something we need to think about. We talk about all the time, but we never really act on, is that we do need to move ourselves away from the boom and bust economy, because we could have another boom here, whether it be oil shale, natural gas, or something else. And we will get a lot of those folks back, but eventually the industry will dwindle again and we'll lose them. So investing money back into our communities, back into economic development on the local level, so that we attract new industries, that we attract new businesses here, so we're not so reliant on that one tax base, but we have a variety of industries, a variety of tax bases, if you will, to count on, not just the one.
All right, thanks, Joe Barbuto. And back to Mark Baker, your thoughts?
No, Johnny, I think, like I said, those North Dakota jobs are in North Dakota because they're developing private land and they're extracting off of private land. So we need to just ensure that we're doing our best to ensure that we create an environment that allows those individuals and those private entities to gain those assets so that they can utilize them.
All right, and final thought, Joe Barbuto.
No, I don't think so. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and Deb, is this going to be our last question from the audience?
I believe it is.
I actually don't want this to end. We're getting some good discussion this evening, and thank you all so much for your questions. This was submitted from our audience tonight, and this will go first, I believe, to Joe Barbuto. And where do you stand on Second Amendment? Sorry.
What are the top needs for what do you believe are the top needs for your district?
Okay, so I'm sorry, I was reading the wrong question. Joe, that one to you. Top needs for your district.
Well, I think we've discussed a few of them tonight, Johnny, and thanks to whoever asked that question. I think one, I feel like I might be harping on a little, but I think it's one of the most important things we can do, and that is we need to invest back into our community. Not just our community, but communities across the state, and I think that our commissioners would attest to this too. We need more resources on the local government level. So much more can be done from them, from our county and from our municipalities than can be done from the state level. So I think one thing is that we need to create a wealth management system moving forward that continues to save but understands the value of investment. I think that we need to improve education in Wyoming. I think we've come from a period of a lot of turmoil, a lot of questions, but we haven't talked enough about student success, and we haven't talked enough about how we can get locals involved, how we get parents involved, how we get teachers involved, how we get stakeholders involved in that conversation about how do we actually define student success, and what does it look like moving forward? And also, when we put some of these measures like accountability in place, I think that we need to see them out. We need to wait them out and see if they work before we try replacing them with a brand new thing. And finally, I think something that our district needs is a representative who's going to be willing to listen, who's going to respond when people ask those questions, who's going to be there for them when they have an idea or a concern. Make that phone call back, send that email back, or show up on their doorstep and have that conversation with them.
All right, very good. Thank you, Joe. And let me give the question once again, Mark Baker. What are the top needs for your district?
Well, thank you, Johnny. I think that the top needs are jobs. I think with jobs comes an atmosphere that keeps people busy. It lessens depression, lessens drug and alcohol abuse. I think we need to fight, we need to do what we can to fight the unemployment problem here. We need to have representation that's willing to go to Cheyenne and make tough decisions and work hard. And I think it's important that we have an atmosphere that is viable for families, so that people feel like they can come here and they're safe, and they have jobs, and they have health care, and they have those things, schools. They have an environment that they want to stay here and they want to prosper here, because Wyoming is a great state. So what we need to do is we need to focus on fighting the regulations so that we can have jobs.
All right, very good. And rebuttal, Joe?
Those things are all true. We do need a lot of those things here, but the fact remains the way we get those is by investing back into our communities. That's the piece that's missing. That's what's going to create jobs. That's what's going to create opportunities for family, and that's really what's going to move our state forward.
Very good. And a closing thought, Mark?
Yeah, thank you, Johnny. I think it's important that, I've worked hand in hand with the commissioners in fighting for that money. The state and the Appropriations Committee, they have everybody's needs that they look at. They're trying to create an atmosphere in the whole state that's viable for everybody. So that it's not just Sweetwater County, but it's Jackson and Laramie and Buffalo and all throughout the state. They have everybody's best interest in mind. They're trying to save for a future. We are in a country that has $17 trillion in debt, and we continue to spend. So I guess for us, when we talk about a rainy day, the rainy day for the Appropriations Committee and the legislature really is when we start spending general fund money on education, and we're not there yet, but it's coming, trust me. The COLES bonuses are going to be gone because of the federal government and the administration, and we're going to have to tighten our belt.
All right, very good. And I believe that closes out. Is that correct, ladies?
Yes, it does.
All right. Sadly, this will draw to the close. We will have closing statements, but this is going to draw to a close this debate, and I'm sad to see it end. There's been a great exchange of ideas, thanks in large part to our audience here this evening. Regarding the closing statements, first we'll hear from the Democratic challenger, Joe Barbuto.
Thanks, John, and thanks, Deb and Beth, for the questions, and all the audience questions too, and thanks for being here tonight and for tuning in if you're listening on the radio. And I do really appreciate this opportunity we've had to discuss, a variety of issues, because frankly, up to this point, I don't think we've had that conversation. From the other side, all I've seen is gun issues. And when it comes to that topic, my opponent and the special interest groups supporting him have mischaracterized and distorted what my position really is on Second Amendment rights. And I think that they're doing that for a reason, because they're scared of losing this seat. When you go into the voting booth on election day, they want you to vote scared. And so what I'm asking you to do tonight is go in there and vote with confidence. Think about the issues we've talked about. Think about what you really want Wyoming to look like going forward, what you want education to be, what you want our economy to look like, what kind of jobs and opportunities you want to be available for not just you, but for your kids and their kids. And I think if you ask those questions and you think about our answers tonight, and think about where we really stand on the issues, I think you'll end up voting for me. And I think that whether you vote for me or not, I hope you'll get out there and vote anyways, because it's important that we all be involved. And whether or not you're going to go and vote early at the courthouse in Green River, that's a new trend, early voting, or whether you're like me and I guess a traditionalist and like to go down to the polling location on election day. I hope you'll cast that ballot for Joe Barbuto, and I sure appreciate you guys being here tonight, and I appreciate all the support, so thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And closing comments now from your incumbent Republican, Mark Baker.
Thanks, Johnny, and thanks for everybody for coming out. You know, he talks about voting scared. That's absolutely not true. We want you to vote informed. I want you to vote informed. The discussion that I've had, or any discussion that I've seen my opponent have, has all been relative to attacking me and putting my integrity on trial. I've really focused on the issues. I have a Facebook page that's 2.5 years old that tells all about the issues. It's there. But there is a stark difference between the two of us. And my opponent has spent the campaign repeating rhetoric that is strikingly similar to many in the Democrat candidates throughout the state. He's hired consultants to design his materials and make phone calls for him and send other people knocking on doors of the constituents. During this campaign, one thing remains true. My opponent has 4 sessions of votes that do not reflect the political views of the majority of the people in the district. Let me take a moment to share one legislative ranking system. The Wyoming Liberty Group indexes legislators every year. After each session, the group takes every bill and analyzes it as to whether it is liberty-friendly, unfriendly, or neutral. Liberty can be defined as freedom from unjust government. Based on the analysis, they rank legislators by assigning them a number, with 1 being the most liberty-friendly legislator. During my opponent's last 2 years, he ranked 58th and 60th out of 61. In the last 2 years, I ranked 17th or 13th and 7th. It just illustrates one more difference between the two of us. During the session, I would spend evenings alone in the Capitol, revising and timing my presentations so that the people of the district would receive the most benefit from the time I spent on the floor. I spent hours answering emails, phone calls from my constituents. I studied bills and actively involved myself in committee meetings. My opponent sponsored bills, then didn't show up to present them in committee. There is a big difference between the two of us. And for every story that he has about me missing an email, I've got a story as well. But moving beyond that, there are fundamental differences between us on policy, experience, morals, and approach, and only a few of them have been discussed tonight. If you would like more information about me or this campaign, contact me at 371-5113 or on Facebook at facebook.com/YRREP48, and I'd love to have a conversation with you. Thank you, Johnny, and thank you for our moderators, and thanks everybody for coming out.
Thank you, Mark. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for joining us this evening, listening live on AM 1360 KRKK. We've got another debate coming up, and this Meet the Candidate Forum for House District 17. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, if you care to put your hands together, I will join you. Thank you so much. We will be back shortly with our next forum.